Hi, everyone. I'm Malvika Sahai.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Dominic Bednar.
And we're your hosts for today's Climate Change Summit. And Brittany here will be drawing as we go along.
Awesome. So, what you all saw here was a snapshot of our climate action events that happened here at U of M's campus earlier this month. It was an action-packed, week-long symposium called Michigan and the Climate Crisis, inspired by the University Bicentennial and the Forward View of Michigan. Google Michigan and the Climate Crisis to see the full videos.
It's clear that we need to take action on climate change now, and you can actually follow a lot of the efforts that have been going on at #UMClimateAction, like Brittany has up on the board there, and we encourage you to continue talking about this conversation over social media with the same hashtag.
Yeah, and we're very much thrilled that you all are here to join in the fight and help us move this forward.
And that's why we're here today. So we're in an auditorium filled with people who are concerned about climate change and want to do something about it.
Together, we can make a huge difference.
And it starts today, and it'll continue. And mark your calendars now for January 18th, same time, same place, where we'll be continuing this discussion.
And that's when we'll have our next Climate Change Summit.
But in the meantime, we have an incredible event planned for today. So please help us to welcome many of our panelists. We'll be hearing from their exciting work that they do, and then we'll also hear from some active sustainability organizations on campus here today. So without further ado, coming to us from Washington, D.C., we have Ben Bunker, who's the CEO of the Global Bright Light Foundation and a Michigan alum from class of 2012.
Coming from Minnesota is Tara Hauska, attorney and director of Honor the Earth and Native American advisor to Bernie Sanders.
From New Haven, Connecticut, we have Angel Su, who's professor and director of Yale University's Data-Driven Environmental Solutions Group.
Newly returned to Detroit, Michigan, Amina Maxey, North American Coordinator for the Global Alliance for Incinerator Alternatives.
From Atlanta, Georgia, we have Kate Parker, who's a meteorologist for weather.com.
And from the nation's capital, we have Arun Sivaram, who's the Philip D. Reed Fellow for Science and Technology on the Council of Foreign Relations.
Great turnout.
And from New York City, we have Shawnee Watkins, who's the community manager for the Solutions Project.
And to moderate today's conversation, we have our very own Dean Peck.
Let's get another round of applause for our panelists today, and Dean Peck, the stage is yours.
All right, well, thanks for everybody for coming. It's a good crowd. And we've been doing a lot on climate on this campus ever since I've been here. And it's wonderful because it all started before I arrived. And as a climate scientist, I was like, we got to get more climate stuff. And all of a sudden, wow, it's already happening. So it's wonderful to have you here because I think one of the really key things is my generation and the ones who came before me were the ones who created the problem of climate change. And well, you know, whether you like it or not, you guys have to solve it. No, we all have to work together to solve it. And obviously we all have children and grandchildren and things too. But it's not going the way we want it to go. So I want to start a conversation here. And I think you've all been prepped and gotten to meet each other. And what I really want to know is what you each think you're most passionate about when it comes to climate change. And anyone can start, and I'll pick someone at random if no one wants to talk.
I feel like I'm in class.
Well, I can go first. Hey everyone, I'm Sean. So, I mean, I think for me what what is passionate about climate change is this right here, is having this conversation with folks who don't always look like who you look like, to really further the conversation about not only how is climate change affecting folks in different communities around the country and around the world, but how folks are acting in their own communities at their own levels to really create change. Because we know that change can't happen there's no one uniform fit. So for me, what's passion is seeing that people are acting up and really taking action.
To echo somewhat of what Sean said, for me, what gets me the most passionate about doing this work has been working with frontline communities that usually are the folks that really are on the front lines and bear the brunt of a lot of that impact of climate, like pollution, and a lot of environmental justice communities. But not only that, in working to kind of reduce greenhouse gas emissions from specific facilities and doing that kind of work, I think the work that really excites me is being able to see communities being really resilient and coming up with really great solutions, pushing for zero waste, creating composting, cooperative businesses, growing their own food locally, doing what they can within the confines that they have and the different resources they have available to kind of build strength. And so I find that really inspiring, and that's kind of what has led me and guided me through a lot of my career and work.
I think for me, the human aspect is so important, and I think everybody's kind of on the same page with that. But aside from sustainability, I feel very strongly about mitigation. As a meteorologist, I have been there as people have died in natural disasters, and those are getting worse. And more people die in flooding in this country than anything else, natural disaster-wise, and that's an increasing risk. So how do we communicate the steps that need to be taken to mitigate those results? How do we get people to build in areas that are safer and build safer homes? How do we help people and communicate that this natural disaster is linked in X, Y, and Z way to these actions? So mitigation and humans and that component of being on the front end of the disaster rather than cleaning up after the fact is something that really drives me to try and translate the great science and work that you guys are doing to the general public on a regular basis.
And I'll say on mitigation, Kate, I completely agree. But to mitigate climate change at a global level is going to require an energy transformation at the scale and speed we have never seen in the world before. And doing that, what I'm passionate about is figuring out the way to do that through innovation. We do not have the energy technologies we need today to achieve a decarbonized world. In order to get there, we're going to need to invest heavily in innovation across different technologies, be they renewable energy or non-renewable clean energy. That's what I'm passionate about. I study it in science labs, in the business sector, and in public policy at the Council on Foreign Relations. I think all three strands need to be intertwined to get new technologies off the drawing board and into markets.
And Varun, just to add on to that, so the work that I'm doing right now is really on the front lines. So we're working in very remote rural communities in Latin America who don't have access to electricity. And for us, I totally agree on the innovation side, but there are technologies out there that if scaled appropriately, and by scale I mean meeting the needs of the people that need certain things. So for example, they want to transition from kerosene to solar. There are technologies out there, and there's a lot of distribution work that needs to be done to get them out. So I think innovation definitely is a piece of it, but it's also taking the solutions we have and moving those out into the field faster through innovative distribution methods as well.
So I'm going to be the data geek in the room and say, I'm passionate about solving the climate crisis with data and information. So one pixel, one data point, one number at a time. So even though scientists with 99% confidence agree that climate change is real and that it's human-made, we don't have the same level of consensus amongst policymakers and people who are actually managing these issues on the ground. So why is that the case? Why is there this disconnect where the scientists agree, but then the policy is totally scattered and across the board, and there's not enough action that's happening? So this is the core of the work that I do. So how do we translate that data and information into usable knowledge? And so as an example of where I'm coming at in this work, I IBM estimates that 90% of the data that exists today was created in the last 2 years, but yet only less than 5% of it is actually being utilized. So most of that information that's being generated by social media, through consumer behavior, through the internet and mobile smartphone apps is just somehow getting lost, and it's just generating more noise. So how can we really distill that signal that resonates with policymakers? And so that's what I'm most passionate about. So matching the innovation, the weather, the local communities, how do we actually match that information and translate that and provide a narrative that motivates people and get them acting?
So 1 year ago today, on October 27th, a line of thousands of police officers and tanks and militarized vehicles pushed out hundreds of indigenous people and our allies from treaty lands in North Dakota. So that's 1 year ago today. It's very hard to see all those images flashing through social media. It's very hard to remember all of that, and knowing that me personally, I'm now part of another resistance camp. So sitting on the front lines and coming out to fly here and see all of you. The parts that I'm most passionate about is protecting what we have left, making sure that people are aware that, yes, climate change is real, yes, data is real, but it's a system in which we're looking at corruption and money and science being left down here and people being left down here. So the parts that always get to me are looking at a community that is incredibly oppressed and has been left out of a conversation for hundreds of years, and that community leading one of the largest resistance movements in decades, and inspiring people around the world to do something about climate change, to care about our environment, to care about human beings, and to see small-scale solar in tribal nations. I mean, we're these little tiny remote communities, but we're still trying to make change and show people and show the world that we can do this together.
How do you think we can work together better? I mean, it seems like you're all touching on this different innovative ways to get things done, and yet it's not getting done. And I wonder if that's because we have too decentralized a set of approaches to this problem. We're all passionate, right? But we're all kind of like doing our own thing a little too much, or is that not the case? How can we move things faster?
So I was going to say that I think there's a disconnect between the science and the communication of the science. And that's something that I think has been true for a while, but now is becoming more pressing because we all know how big these issues are. So if we can find ways to partner with media outlets or social media companies to tell the stories, the human stories of climate change, better, more succinctly, in more powerful ways, I think we can get a lot more traction politically on these issues. So for me, it's how do we realistically make science communication a really important focus of our work?
Well, jumping on that is that that's what I have seen analytically working for weather.com. And by the way, we have millions of people every day. So we've got a huge sample size of people that, what are they clicking on? What are they interested in? What grabs their attention? And the human component is not an option. It's necessary for the communication of the risks, to the environment, not just climate, but the environment as well. And I do think that there is a bit of a hunger for it. And this is a small example, but the documentary Emmys nationally this year, the section that has to do with health and environment and things like that, all of the entries were Ebola and AIDS and remarkable pieces. But I'm extremely proud to say that an environmental piece that I did made it into that crowd. So people are interested if we can produce it and put a face to it. So I agree on the human component completely.
I agree too with human aspect. I think for us at the Solutions and 100% campaign, one of the things that we strive on is, we're showing that clean energy, 100% clean energy is not only possible, it's already happening, but also while doing that, flipping the face of what you think of clean energy. Clean energy doesn't mean just solar panels and wind turbines. It actually means people working to redo abandoned houses, to make it more energy efficient and weatherizing it. It means at Standing Rock providing solar lamps to the reservation camps to make sure that the activist is really going on. Activism is happening and is still at the front line. And I think too, to also somewhat challenge your question, I think, to answer with one, like, why can't we do it faster? I think that's somewhat, in my opinion, sometimes what halts us is because we're looking for just like a one easy access answer. And I think in reality, what we have to do is we're doing a whole shift. We're doing a shift in our movement. We're doing a shift in our narrative and how we're telling the story. We need to change who is the face of what it is. Black and brown folks are the most violently impacted by climate change. So it should, for the most part, be a lot of black and brown folks leading the conversation of how can we make infrastructure that is more adequate and accessible for everyone and not just for a group of select folks. So I think it's really about like having a mindset of like, yes, working together, but also understanding that what we're trying to do is change so much of how we're currently living, and that requires a lot of new innovation, new thinking, and stepping out of your comfort box.
So 2 things. I expected that you'd say, clean energy is not just wind and solar, and that's absolutely true. Clean energy is also nuclear energy. Clean energy is also clean energy. Zero carbon energy can also encompass the combustion of fossil fuels with carbon capture and sequestration. There are many options for clean energy. But the second point I want to make is, Dean Overpeck, you said, hey, is it the case that we're trying to adopt too decentralized an approach? I think that's a terrific question. The Paris Agreement was an example of a decentralized approach, a bottom-up approach where countries got to pick their own climate targets. Arguably, it was more successful than previous COP summits, because the previous summits, like the Kyoto Protocol, attempted to impose a top-down framework. However, the Paris goals don't add up to where we need to get. Allowing this bottom-up decentralized framework did not get us to pledges that add up to limiting climate change to 2 degrees Celsius. So to your question, it is clear that decentralized is better than top-down in some sense because it's allowed us to move forward in Paris, but it's not sufficient. So where do we go from here? I like the thesis advanced by the co-chair of the Brookings Climate Initiative, David Victor, who argues that Paris and subsequent COPs are just one of several different streams of progress. We can make some progress multilaterally, but not a whole lot. That's why the national pledges don't add up to 2 degrees. On top of that, we absolutely need technological change. And finally, we need to use fora that aren't 195 countries getting together because you have huge collective action problems. Rather, small clubs of countries, perhaps the major emitters like China, India, and the United States and Europe, working on small, short-lived pollutants like HFCs. These could be areas to make more rapid progress in addition to the multilateral process on carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases.
So I want to build on Varun's point because you touched on a core part of my research. So I actually am going to challenge you a little bit and disagree with you. So I think that the solution is these decentralized efforts that are happening. So we heard in June, President Trump announced his plans, his intent to withdraw from this Paris Climate Agreement. And immediately that set the world into panic mode. What's going to happen if we don't have U.S. leadership as the world's second largest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions stepping up to the plate and following through on its Paris pledge? And immediately you had this groundswell of mayors, governors, CEOs of American companies, local universities, community colleges, actually University of Michigan joined as well, into this effort to pledge we are still in. We still support the goals of the climate agreement, even if President Trump does not. And so that's actually where I think the solutions are going to come, is actually from this bottom-up decentralized process. And you're right, the Paris pledges don't add up. That's going to lead us to a 3-degree warmed world by 2100. And so we need to have these actors fill in the gap. And so that's a core part of my research. I actually, on my slide, I don't know if it's going to be shown, but I present this map that we put together of all of these thousands of actions that are happening across the United States. So I urge you as citizens, as students, as representatives from your organizations, take a look at our map. Look at your county, see whether or not Climate Opinion is supporting action on climate change, if your fellow constituents actually believe that climate change is happening, and who are the actors actually taking action in your county and district. So take a look at our map. I would say, Dean Peck, to your question, one of the challenges why action isn't happening from an academic perspective, the incentives aren't there. As an academic, I have to teach my classes, I need to publish my papers, but nobody is giving me points for putting together this map, which took 100 hours of time to scrape all that data, compile it, do all this big data analytics, and no one's saying, this is great, you're going to get tenure and keep your job based on doing this. Yeah, so there's the map. So that the incentives need to change. There needs to be something to pull us out of our respective silos and get us working together. So whether that's the platforms like this, for example, which I think are fantastic to meet everybody else and to start those conversations going, or if it's giving money, seed funding for people to start new startups or opportunities to really get things moving. But yeah, I think the incentives need to be there.
To build off of what others have been saying, I also so my background is in environmental justice organizing. I do work with an organization called Gaia around waste and waste pollution. And so traditionally we're working, like a lot of people I'm sure, on federal policy around climate. And then there was a big change, as some folks may have noticed. And so our focus really shifted, and actually it went more strongly to the power of the organizations that are in our network. Most of the organizations that are in the Gaia network are engaged very strongly at the municipal level and have a lot of ties to their leaders. And so a lot of them have been able to push forward zero waste policy and things that at the municipal level that are able to shift things at the broader level. And so I think the focus at the city and state level is actually has added some strength. It's definitely not added all of the strength. And then I also think that one of the things that we have seen as a result of Trump, which once hopefully he is no longer in office, we are going to need to find a way to continue forward, is that groups are working together now that did not used to work together, cross-sectorally, amongst labor, amongst the environmental movement, the environmental justice movement, amongst philanthropy. And it shouldn't take only us being in this place of the dire straits to work together. We need to figure out when times are good, when we have someone in office who's on our side, how we continue to work together. Because we saw in 2009 that there was an attempt at a climate bill. And that failed because that was not an inclusive process. It did not include folks on the front lines. And I want to speak specifically to this point, and I see it as a challenge. Often when you hear folks talk about people of color, low-income communities, it's often from a storytelling perspective. The thing is that we are all experts in different ways in the fields that we're in. And that folks who do environmental justice work, it's not just something that's on the side or something that's to tack on. They need to be at the table and an integral part of the decision making, because that will lead to greater success at the end. Yeah. They're not the only person at the table, but it's to make sure that space is inclusive and very principled. And so I think that with movements like that, we'll really see success.
Hear, hear.
Yeah, seriously.
I think, Trump, I was very sad that Bernie didn't win. Is anybody sad that Bernie didn't win? I mean, seriously. But Trump is the greatest killer of apathy, I think, that we've seen in a really long time. Yeah. He's forced all of these conversations about the Paris Climate Accord that maybe people didn't even really know what that was before, but seems like it might be a big deal that climate change is really happening. I definitely really appreciate your words, and I think, we're seeing a lot of people in this kind of dire straits coming together, being forced to come together, and also recognizing at the same time, these impacted communities that are on the front lines of this actually have thoughts, besides just storytelling. It's actually very, very important, and thinking outside of the box. So, I spent most of my morning this morning actually going back and forth with several green groups. We've been focusing heavily on divestment, so following money again. Looking at money as ways to pull funding out of these projects. And it's been highly successful. I mean, you're talking a grassroots group of people who has almost no money, going around, meeting with these bankers, meeting with investors, and to the tune of now we're almost at like $6 billion being pulled out of the fossil fuel industry. I mean, that's incredible organizing work. Just on the 23rd, we're looking at this globally, the Equator Principles, which is a set of documents that governs the banking industry and requires them to have human rights policies and indigenous peoples policies. We had 106 bank shutdowns in just one city in Seattle. I mean, that's a way to get this conversation going because it is so urgent. I think it's really hard to sit in rooms of people that are very well-meaning, but not looking at this like this is happening right now. There are people dying from climate change right now. I'm going back to a camp that's trying to fight, a massive 900,000 barrel per day tar sands line that they want to put through the headwaters of the Mississippi into Lake Superior. I mean, that's happening right now. So I really hope that people can recognize and come together and bring all of our knowledge and all of our skill sets to address this problem, because it's going to get worse.
On that point,
I just quickly was going to say, it's interesting, a lot of this conversation that we're having, it seems to be a lot of us versus them dialogue, and I think that that's not successful. In order to be inclusive, we have to be inclusive as a whole country and reach across aisles and make this a nonpartisan issue. It is a nonpartisan issue.
Yeah.
And whatever your tactic is, I found it successful to, talk a lot in tax dollars, your dollars and cents. Whatever your directive is, whatever your way of communicating on a level playing field is, that is going to be, I think, where we find a little more success. Because if we stay in our own echo chamber, we're not going to get the entire country on board.
To be clear, when I say them, I'm talking about the oil industry.
Oh, no. No, I'm just
public.
saying in general, this is a general problem whenever we talk about, us having all of our little different parts and it coming together and reaching across, the aisle on this topic and not staying on whatever side you feel comfortable is where I think we can move towards success.
I definitely agree that, this is a problem that takes both sides, how you figure on that. But I do think that there is, back to the point about groups working together that before wasn't. Before I was at Solutions Project, I worked for an organization called Green Faith, which is organizing around faith communities around the world, which in itself is somewhat of a niche kind of organizing group. And to see the way that conversation now is included and brings people together, there is something that isn't being so spoken here, but there's a lot of healing that has to be done as well in these conversations. The conversations that people are now having together, Big Greens, and when we say Big Greens, these are groups like Sierra Club, 350.org, Greenpeace, with more frontline organizations. So, ones like Gaia, ones like Solidarity in Highland Park. That comes from trust coming together because you have to trust the person who you're talking with to have that conversation. And if we're not able to, we can come into a conversation kind of definitely already knowing what you already know because we're all humans, right? But we sometimes too have to take a deep breath of take a deep breath and focus on the matter at hand and also look at us as individuals and see that people are hurting. People are dying right now. I live in Brooklyn. Superstorm Sandy was 5 years ago, and people are still in the projects, are still recovering, but people on the Upper East Side are totally fine. So if those people, just in a New York context, if they were to come together to figure out how can we as New Yorkers, fight and win climate change, then the conversation about the people who are still affected by it needs to have that time to share that hurt. So no, it's not an us versus them, but there is a bit of human integrity and human compassion where those who are hurting need to be able to give their time to share what's going on and to be heard and not to be spoken over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like you can simplify it, right? In a sense that in any conversation with any person, if you want to have sort of a successful business relationship or partnership with them, the first thing you need to know is what they care about and what drives them. So when I think about these conversations, going to someone who may be conservative politically, but maybe for some reason, let's say with energy efficiency being an example, they really care about preserving their pension. So you talk to them about how energy efficiency can help lower their monthly bills, and over time, that can make their pension more secure. So you start with where people are, and then you invite them to discuss with you whatever your point is. And I feel like too many times we frame our conversation as, we're going to talk about climate change, and that's going to be the conversation, and that turns off, I'd say, most people who don't want to engage, and those are the people that you need to engage in order for this to move forward.
And
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead. It's okay.
I do want to make the point that much of this conversation has centered around what are the right strategies to convince people who may not share your point of view or to communicate more broadly. And that's absolutely an important discussion to have. But we need to make sure we also cover the topic of what it is that we are communicating. I do not believe the answers are as simple as some folks may want you to believe. We do not know actually how to solve climate change. Decarbonization is an extraordinarily complex problem. And when I see pledges, for example, for 100% renewable energy coming from local governments, I worry that you may be doing more harm than good. And as a result, I want to spend as much time on trying to understand what the correct pathways are for decarbonization, so ones that are actually plausible. And then, once we figure those things out, then figuring out how to communicate them well. But putting the cart before the horse, communicating that, aha, climate change is happening now, totally agree. We should be doing something right now, totally agree. That thing that we should be doing right now is 100% renewable energy. Not so sure I agree. I think we run the risk of prematurely locking ourselves into a particular path, locking ourselves into particular technology options that may not be cost optimal, that may not be feasible or even realistic. We got to be careful about what we are driving toward. It is complicated. And Kate's point about an inclusive dialogue, we need perspectives from all over the conservative and liberal side of the spectrum in order to figure out what that correct path is.
I think, so on that point around 100% renewable, and I'm going to push back a little bit. I think, I hear what you're saying, and that, I don't disagree. But what I do think is that working with policymakers, I can come from my perspective, from doing zero waste work. We push for cities to get on a zero waste path. People are always like, zero waste, that's not realistic. And we're like, your goal, zero waste is a term coined by the sector, and zero waste is the end goal. You are on a path toward reducing your waste, towards recycling, composting, reducing consumption altogether. And that's how I see 100% renewable goals. You have to set a high bar so that you can get on the path to achieving it. A lot of the stuff policymakers and politicians say doesn't, it's crap, But you need that as something to look to on the horizon. And then I also want to add that, so I've worked for a lot of networks. I've done a lot of work where I'm like the staff person amongst like a super diverse group, and so I have to be like Switzerland and like have to, and so, but it's not easy to do coalition work, network work. You have to be able to have a skill set. And I think what I hear and from talking to all the folks downstairs, what I see from everyone is that a lot of folks here are connectors. And like that's the role I played in the networks I was in, is like, I see a group here, they need a resource. I know this person here I met who's an amazing grister. Let me connect them. What are the ways that we can like build across all of our different, like I said, our different sectors, build with conservative folks, build with, progressive folks, build with radical folks. And the way to do that is to like really dig into our own networks and make those connections to help like make this stage like 10 times more. Like that's kind of how I see it.
I'd add to that, not just connecting, but translating.
Translating, yes.
As well. So not
because people in the hood don't understand all that wonky donkey stuff we speak up here.
Yeah, exactly.
And I went to school, but they don't.
Yeah.
I would add to and push back also. If you're coming at it from a mindset of we need to recognize that just transition is real, but continuing to think, okay, well, 100% renewables, maybe that doesn't quite make sense. All of these things come at the expense of somebody else, right? So I'm looking at it when I'm sitting on this side of the table of indigenous communities around the world hold 80% of the world's remaining biodiversity. That's a fact. The reason for that is because we have a very strong connection to the earth and to the world around us. Our lives are still containing all the medicines and the land and all of those things. We haven't lost our connection to who we are with the earth, right? And so now those remaining biodiverse resources people want them, right? They're like, okay, so I'm gonna put a pipeline in, I'm not gonna put it through white suburbia, I'm gonna put it through your land. I'm gonna go in and drill for oil, well, I'm not gonna do it over in Hollywood, I'm gonna go out to North Dakota and do it where someone's never heard of. I'm gonna have a Bakken oil field and all the human destruction and human cost that comes with that of shipping in thousands of workers and impacting those local communities with sex trafficking and drugs and all those things. There shouldn't be a mindset of sacrifice zones are acceptable. There is no such thing as a sacrifice zone. So when we look at renewable energy and we're moving into renewable energy, it should be from a framework of sacrifice zones are not okay. It's not okay. Like your backyard is my backyard and we're all in this together.
Just to be clear, it seems like you may have been pushing back against my point. Am I right?
I'm pushing back towards looking at it from a non-renewable energy perspective.
Oh, absolutely.
Like
I am 100% in favor of decarbonization. And decarbonization is going to be important in order to preserve biodiversity and to limit climate change. Renewable energy, 100% renewable energy is not the only way to get to decarbonization. In fact, it turns out to be one of the most expensive ways to get there. So we are on the same page here. It's important not to conflate 100% renewable energy with the overall goal that everybody can get behind, which is 80 to 100% decarbonization as fast as we can.
I think it's important to think about how we're framing that too, though. To frame it around, okay, what is included within that? Does that mean further fossil fuel infrastructure? Does that mean like continued extraction of resources from the ground, or what does that mean?
It may very well be. It may very well be the case that our cost-optimal route to decarbonization is to continue to burn fossil fuels, but to find ways to capture and sequester those carbon emissions, as well as to reduce the other criteria air pollutants that come from burning fossil fuels. We have an enormous energy infrastructure, and denying that would be unrealistic. It may be that fossil fuels plus CCS, alongside nuclear, alongside renewable energy, alongside mass electrification of other sectors like heat and transportation, is the cost-optimal way to get to decarbonization. And setting these constraints where we say, no, we must shut down fossil fuels immediately, we must abandon nuclear, is either unrealistic or like willfully uneconomical.
I'm not saying that the solution is turning off the valves tomorrow.
Thank you.
Like that is not, I'm not saying that we should just all shut off like all the tar sands lines tomorrow. We should shut off every single fossil fuel industry in the world. Clearly our energy infrastructure is run on fossil fuels. We are highly fossil fuel dependent. However, the point I'm making is we should not be looking at it from a mindset of let's continue to expand that industry. That industry should be getting decreased steadily every single day and rapidly. That needs to happen. And if it's not cost effective, like that has to happen. And if it's not cost effective, we're looking at balancing humanity and morality with cost. Right? Like
I'd like to add. I'd like to add that we're talking currently about economic costs. The costs currently and historically for the pollution that's come from greenhouse gases have been, the folks who've borne the brunt have been poor people and people of color. They die.
And women.
From asthma attacks. They die from, I'm saying that there's Detroit 48217 zip code is the most polluted zip code in the state of Michigan. The predominant population there is African American. The income there is also low income. It is home to numerous polluting facilities. And so they have a need today. They had a need 10 years ago to have those facilities reduce their emissions. And so the thing is like I hear that, but those folks feel an urgency, as well as folks who are in climate impacted zones like Puerto Rico and Virgin Islands. But I'm saying that folks today really feel that need, and that's something that's very important. That I think should not be only important to the folks that live there. It should be important if someone will decide to build it next to their home and live there and put it in their community, then I'm not going to say they should do that, but that's not what happens because they know the impacts. And so I definitely feel that we have to have a strong line as far as where we stand. We can't be both, have both.
But I want to touch on that, if I could.
Yeah,
so
let's wrap.
Yeah. So,
so we're moving into the final comment stage now.
Okay, so I'll get there. But because I just want to wrap around this, I think there was a point that I was sharing that was really being functioned here, which is, 100% renewable energy, regardless if you agree it or not, we can all agree that that's something that is easy to say. It comes off the tongue easily. People know what you're talking about when you say that. For me, the way I look at this work is, how can people who are not in this room, who are not in the academics, who are not in the organizing groups, how can my mom and dad understand what the hell I'm doing? And when we talk about decarbonization, when we talk about all of these big academic words, while yes, it's great, and yes, there is an accuracy, the urgency comes from when we can share it in everyday language. And so I think that is a really key part in understanding why now 100% clean energy is being rallied so hard. Yes, I agree that cities are making that commitment without actually really deciding what that means. And oftentimes, people are saying 100%, but what about, then it's cities and communities are still with incinerators and things like that. But it is something that can corral people. And so I think that's one thing, regardless of where you fall on, we can understand that we need to have common language. The reason why President Trump and all the ones that are doing this, they have a language that works. People understand it. If we don't have something that can rally folks together, then we're already starting 10 steps behind the enemy. And the enemy here, like Tara said, is the fossil fuel industry, is capitalism. It is the systems that are set up to keep people from not moving up. So I just like to name that.
Why don't we keep going around, and I think
Final words. But
that is the final word.
Oh,
Excellent.
A very powerful final word. If you want to say another one, I'll let you do it. But I'm going to get in trouble. But why don't we just move around, and if you think at the end you need another final word, I think that's perfectly okay, Sean. Because these are powerful messages, and we want to make sure they're heard. Rune?
Absolutely. And I think I have a slide up if we can bring that up. Again, I want to echo Kate's point of inclusive dialogue. I do not think capitalism is the enemy is going to get us there, but I'm happy to talk offline about it. I want to leave by letting you guys know that there is a policy proposal I think the state of Michigan really should pursue. And I agree with Angel. Your point about local action is fantastic. I think Michigan should become part of the United States Climate Alliance. This is the alliance of 14 states and Puerto Rico that have signed up to maintain their Paris commitment even after President Trump announced that he would pull the United States out by 2020. Now, that does not mean that we just make an announcement. In addition to making an announcement, we have to have prudent and feasible policy action. In my opinion, that probably looks like some sort of linked carbon market. But anyway, I think this is a tremendously powerful potential possibility for Michigan. It would encompass nearly 40% of the United States population, $7 trillion in GDP, the third largest country in the world. If you counted just these states, it would be a great idea.
U of M will help make that happen. Kate?
My final thoughts are twofold, and I kind of want to leave you with some encouragement in ways that I think might be helpful in your community. I talked about mitigation, because even though we are doing everything that we can to limit the temperature rise on Earth, we're still seeing impacts and we're still seeing changes, and we will continue to see those. What can you do in your research, in your projects, in your community to help people be safer, to help them adapt? Because that is the unfortunate reality that we're faced with. You do not have the same growing seasons if you're a farmer. You cannot live in the same areas that are now a floodplain that are going to flood every 25 years versus 500. I know that's a misnomer. It's about percentages, but we'll use the year flood zone versus the 500-year flood zone. Mitigation is going to be the thing that we need to adapt, and that's going to help us both financially, and it's going to help save lives, which is critical. If you can build, storm structures in certain communities where people can take shelter, whatever it may be, getting people living away from coastlines that are eroding, these are positive steps. The second thing I would charge you with is that a lot of people in this crowd right now, you're studying different things, perhaps you're working on different projects. Don't leave it to the publishing. You publish your research, and then you sit back and you say, I did good. Take it a step further. Further those ideas and implement them. Don't leave them on the pages of Science magazine. Translate them for people. Put them into a language that we can understand, and help people to understand what that research that you did and what you discovered can be implemented into policies that can make for a better environment, make better environmental decisions as far as our entire planet goes, starting here in Michigan.
So my final word, I'm going to speak to both the need to take individual action when it comes to the contributions we make to climate change, as well as the systematic contribution from a zero waste angle, because that's what I do, talk about trash. So, so first, one of the first and easiest things that we can do is that every year that passes, a lot of our cities and communities move a lot more towards single-use disposable plastic. And so one of the things you can easily do that will have a great impact so that you're not disposing of a lot of things that should be reusable in landfills or incinerators, so as to, bring your own fork, bring your own straw. Just don't try to reduce that impact, because we are in the organization I work for is in a group called the Break Free from Plastics Coalition. And the work that we're doing around that is global because Gaia is a global network. There will be more plastic in the ocean than fish in the sea by 2050 if we continue down the path that we're on. And the impact of all that plastic is really felt by communities that rely on the ocean for their sustenance, as well as just large, I'm sure you know from weather, that there's also lots of other impacts. The second thing I'll say is that really to not only take individual action, but to really get involved in with your government. If it's with your city council or if it's at the state level, you should be actively pushing for zero waste in your city. Do you know if your city has a zero waste goal? I know Ann Arbor does. Ann Arbor is a great leader. But you should really push your city to say, we want to move towards 50% zero waste by 2030 or 2025. And so those are things that will really aid in reducing climate change because landfill and incineration, like I said, both have greenhouse gas impacts. Landfill through methane and incinerators through their carbon dioxide emissions. So just to get a little nerdy about it, that's what I would leave you with, and also to just thank you all for coming today. It's been a really great conversation.
Angel.
So I just want to echo what Tara, Amina, and Sean said. I think absolutely we cannot be complacent in accepting the current energy infrastructure and the fossil fuel industry's legacy on our current carbon emissions and the current state that we're in with respect to climate change. So in my freshman seminar, I teach a unit on path dependency and this idea of lock-in. And so I probably will be run off the stage for saying this, but part of the reason why we're locked in to the current emissions trajectory that we're in, and we're not able to decarbonize as quickly as we need to, is because of the auto industry. And that's established the US onto this path of highways and car dependencies. And I mean, the other day I was going to a wedding in Philadelphia and we looked at the price of Amtrak tickets. It was gonna cost my husband and I $400 to get from New Haven to Philadelphia. To rent a car, $85 for the entire weekend. So which choice did we make? It was obviously to take the car. So I mean, we have to demand our legislators and our local governments to insist on having a trajectory and a path that is zero carbon, low carbon, and we can't simply accept the current status quo. I mean, I think that that's the worst part, and the reason why we're failing on climate change is our own complacency. So yeah, I need to be better. I need to just stomach it and pay the $400 for Amtrak next time, and to make these choices on an individual level, and then just to not accept the current status.
Thank you. Sarah.
So earlier I said that the solution is obviously not turning off the tar sands lines tomorrow, but the solution should be that that we are taking off the tar sands eventually, right? That we are stopping it at the source, and that should be our end goal. And yes, capitalism is a very destructive force for many people, and we are complacent, and we're stuck in these systems. Yeah. That's why we're in the place that we're in right now. There are substantive things you can do. I get asked again and again, how can I help? How can we help your community, your remote community? How can we get to you? I would question, where is this university banking? Questions like that, those things actually matter, right? They listen to money, and it's amazing what just a little group of people can do. I got to question Enbridge directly the other night at a public hearing about their recent losses of credit facilities, and they got visibly uncomfortable, I mean, that was it feels good. But at the same time, those are real things. Those are actual substantive actions of us working within these systems that are so broken, but still trying to achieve change. Another piece of that is always looking at, what is the history? What's the truth of this place? What is your connection to the earth? Remembering who you are as a person and educating others about it. It's my understanding there was actually a burnt lake burnout, is that what it's called? And that was a forced relocation of local and indigenous people here. It's always important to acknowledge whose land you're on. We're on indigenous land right now. And to recognize that, we're part of this and we all need to move forward together. That's so important, to move forward together and make a change. There are things you can do, and let's be inclusive and not be complacent and fight against the Trump machine that's happening all over the world.
Thank you. Ben.
So how many students do we have in here right now? Wow.
Heyo.
Everybody's a student, right?
Yeah.
So I want to tell a little bit of a personal story about sort of my time at Michigan. I was here 5 years ago, graduated from what was then SNRE, which is now SEAS. Going go blue. Gotta do it. But when I was in my, sort of the end of my first year, I was looking to internship opportunities, and there was an internship available through the Graham Institute with Duke Energy. Now, for someone coming from my perspective, I believe in renewable energy. I've dedicated my life and my career to it. But I saw that as an opportunity to understand the system that was currently in place. Totally. And so Duke is a massive burner of coal, but they also do projects with renewables and wind in certain areas. So I wanted to understand how the system worked so that I could work from the inside to improve it. Now, that was only an internship. It only lasted for 3 or 4 months. But that led to me then becoming the CEO of Global Brightlight many years later. So I guess what I'm saying is that you need to be open to working with people who you may not agree with philosophically, and especially open to working within the systems that exist now so you can actually understand how they work to effectively change them.
Totally. Thank you. I owe you.
So one thing I just would say, the Solutions Project, what I frequently notice is we get noticed for 2 big things. One, we have the research by our co-founder, Mark Jacobson at Stanford for 100% clean energy. The second is that Mark Ruffalo, who plays the Hulk in the Avengers, is another one of our co-founders. And how those two come together, we can get a lot of really good blitz or whatever, but nothing of what we do wouldn't be possible without the work of local leadership. We have grantee networks that span across the country, some here, that we are funding and investing in, and it's because of that work. Right now, California is only 1 House vote away from passing 100% clean energy statewide. And California is the 6th largest economy in the world. That wouldn't have been possible without the grantees and organizations like Asian Pacific American Environment Network, California Environmental Justice Alliance, these local groups that are meeting like we are here and having conversations to really figure out. So like what's been here, one thing I would really encourage is just get involved. Find, whether it's getting involved in city council, city government, find a local organization, environmental justice organization, one where it's a diverse group of people where you can have a conversation to really figure out what you can do to advance your community or just be more aligned with what you feel is a value system that you live personally that you would like your community to live in too. So that's what I would leave.
Thank you.
Well, thank you again so much to our excellent panel and to Dean Peck for this riveting conversation that was genuinely awesome and the actual definition of the word awesome.